Okay, it's time to go. It's hello and welcome to everyone joining us from around the world and in whichever time zone you're situated. It's therefore good morning, good day, or good evening. It's your choice. My name's Alan Race. I'm chair of the World Congress of Faith's Executive Committee, and we're calling this seminar Spirituality and Ecology, Religious Wisdom for the Future. And we're going to hear from a range of voices. But first, I want to say that I'm immensely pleased that the World Congress is collaborating with the Parliament of the World's Religions, especially as the two organizations share interreligious concerns, but also really quite a deep history. The first parliament we know was inaugurated in 1893 in Chicago, and the first World Congress conference was held in 1936 in London. So in this event, we'll be hearing from four major traditions: Indigenous, Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim. And we'll also have some concluding remarks from Kusumita Pedersen, my co-conspirator from the Parliament's Climate Action Task Force. And Kusumita will also be introducing two of the speakers. Let me say at this point, we're going to make a recording of the event, and I'm trusting and hoping that that meets with your approval. So let me say something now by way of general comment on our theme. We live, it said, in the Anthropocene, the time of human domination of our environment, our climate, and our effect, for good or ill, on all life. The growing knowledge of our place in this ecology of all life is the result of scientific discoveries. But the theme of interconnectedness is also ancient wisdom. Our human responsibility for the care of the earth is one thing, but how we imagine our human placing in a wider philosophical, wisdom, and religious sense seems to me to deserve more reflection than is often the case. The great eco-theologian Thomas Berry put our situation like this, very pithily. He said, "The story of the universe is at once scientific, mythic, and mystical." For me, you couldn't get a better summation in one sentence of what living in the Anthropocene now entails. Here's a further inspiration from Tom Berry. He says, "We've consistently thought of the human as primary and the earth as derivative. Only when the cosmos is acknowledged as the matrix of all value will we be able to solve the ecological crisis and arrive at a more comprehensive view of who we are in the community of the earth." These imaginative words, I think, speak for themselves, and I hope we can explore them together in our seminar. There'll be an opportunity to make comments and ask questions, and do this through the chat function in Zoom. The moderator of each session will have to make choices about which comments and questions to make public, because our time schedules are quite tight. So I hope you'll forgive us if your question doesn't quite make it to the lottery jackpot. Let's begin our explorations at what some people think of as the hard end of ecological debates, and that is with the economic realities of what we face. So I'm going now to introduce Sir Partha Dasgupta, who's the Frank Ramsey Professor Emeritus of Economics from Cambridge University. That's Cambridge, UK, not USA. And the author of a highly significant report, The Economics of Biodiversity. Professor Dasgupta is the recipient of many awards and honors from around the world for services to economics in relation to different dimensions of the environment. He's also conversant with debates in philosophy and ethics, And so we're extremely fortunate to have him with us, and especially because for many, the economic activity of the world seems so bound up with ecological destruction that we wonder how we can make the changes that are necessary if we are to avert real disaster. Professor Dasgupta is aware of this danger, of course, and his report, The Economics of Biodiversity, which was commissioned by the British government a couple of years ago, faces these challenges head on. But as I understand him, he's not defeatist. The foreword to that report was written by David Attenborough, the celebrated naturalist. And I'm going to cite David Attenborough's final paragraph. Economics, he says, is a discipline that shapes decisions of the utmost consequence, and so matters to us all. The Dasgupta review at last puts biodiversity at its core and provides the compass that we urgently need. In doing so, it shows us how, by bringing economics and ecology together, we can help save the natural world at what may be the last minute, and in doing so, save ourselves. Well, that was David Attenborough, as I say, introducing the Dasgupta review. And so now it's for me to hand over to Professor Dasgupta in person to tell us a little about it.
Thank you very much. It's a real great privilege to be with you, and so I'm grateful that you've invited me. And I hope you can hear me well. Okay, good. I'm going to begin by noticing that, recognizing that we all have various strands to our personalities. On the morning, we are one person. In the afternoon, we are another, yet another. And I'm going to take, because of your request, your invitation to me on this occasion, to take a hard-nosed economic viewpoint. That's what you want. But do believe me, I'm softer than that, a lot softer. And I embrace notions of sacredness as well, as much as anybody else. But this is not the occasion for me, because you are the leaders, not I. Okay. Not so long ago, the economic questions requiring urgent attention could be studied by excluding nature from formal economic reasoning, as it made sense to focus on the accumulation of produced capital, roads, buildings, ports, machines, and human capital, health, education. Unfortunately, the resulting macroeconomic models of growth and development so directed the way economists in academia, national governments, and international organizations collect and analyze data today, it has become a commonplace that we can bypass nature in our economic lives. Now, I said, not so long ago, it made sense. And the reason it made sense was, say, at the end of the Second World War, there was devastation all around. Europe was on its knees. Far East were desperately poor, destroyed, needed uplifting. Plus, of course, there were the new developing countries which needed to develop, which is why the concentration was on produced capital, accumulating produced capital and human capital. But the idea that we can bypass nature, that's 70 years ago now, we have moved on, is a profound error. Nature is our home. She is our most precious asset. And I will argue in a few minutes, in the next few minutes, that the idea that we are stewards of nature seems to me to be fundamentally wrong. In the absence of nature, we are nothing. We can be extinguished. She's far greater than we can conceive. And so, in a sense, we have to protect ourselves by protecting nature around us. So the causality is, in some sense, in my judgment, the other way around. The belief that we can bypass nature has been strengthened by the fact that the average person today enjoys a far higher income, is less likely to be in absolute poverty, and lives significantly longer than she did even 70 years ago. Since 1950, the global expectancy of life at birth has risen from 46 years to 73 years. The world economy has grown more than 15-fold to over $130 trillion a year. that global per capita income has increased more than fivefold to over $17,000 a year. And there are 5.3 billion more people today to enjoy that increase. World population today is 7.8 billion. It would seem then that we are living in the very best of times. And of course, books are written pointing that out, expressing joy. But even while we have enjoyed the fruits of economic growth, the demands we have made of nature's goods and services have for some decades exceeded her ability to supply them on a sustainable basis. Because the difference between demand and sustainable supply is met by a diminution of nature, the gap has been increasing, threatening our descendants' lives. We have been collectively damaging nature at an alarming rate, with biodiversity declining faster than any time in history. By one inevitably very crude estimate, the ratio of demand to sustainable supply is today approximately 1.6, which provides the image that we need 1.6 Earths to meet our current demands on a sustainable basis. It would seem then that we are also living at the very worst of times. Nature is an asset, like produced capital and human capital. But like education and health, nature is not merely an economic good. We all rely on the goods and services nature supplies, but nature's worth goes far beyond its use value, the value to us as we go about our lives. Aspects of nature have intrinsic, even sacred value, and all cultures have the notion of sacredness expressed in different ways in different aspects of nature. Moreover, we are embedded in nature. We are not external to her. Once we include these aspects of nature in our lives, the economics of biodiversity, which is the diversity of life, becomes a study in portfolio management. This too should not be a surprise, for we are all asset managers, whether as farmers or fishermen, foresters or miners, households or firms, governments or charities. We each manage our assets in line with our motivation and the constraints we face. So then why are we collectively failing to manage our global portfolio of assets efficiently? A central reason is that nature's worth to a society is not reflected in the prices that are charged for them. Nature is mobile, silent, and invisible. It is hard to trace the consequences, often deleterious consequences, of human actions to those who are responsible for them. That makes it very hard for markets to function well. But it isn't simply a case of market failure. It is a broader institutional failure. Our institutions have been unable to create the necessary incentives for us to economize our use of nature's fundamental services. The open seas and the atmosphere are global public good. We use the former for fishing and for transportation, but we don't pay a rent for that use because nobody owns them. And we use the latter as the sink for our carbon emissions, and yet we don't pay a price for emissions because nobody owns the atmosphere. Worst, governments subsidize the use of nature to the extent of some 4 to 6 trillion US dollars annually. In effect, we pay ourselves to exploit rather than protect our home. So we need a transformative change to correct for the imbalance. My review identifies 3 broad transitions that are needed, and I will conclude with the enumeration of them. First, we need to address the imbalance between our demands on nature and its supply. On the one hand, this means setting ambitious global targets for meaningful conservation and restoration, and invest more in nature to increase the quantity and quality of our stocks of natural assets. There are means for increasing the productivity of nature, by investing in nature. On the other hand, we need to remove those subsidies so as to reduce the demands we make on nature. The latter includes expansion of foreign aid in the form of family planning and reproductive services to developing regions that are yet far from enjoying fertility transition. We also need devices to restructure our consumption and production patterns and to further reduce our demands on nature. One such device would be the requirement that firms disclose the characteristics of their entire supply chain from source to sink. Disclosure of what we are consuming, where it comes from, how nature is affected by what we consume, is a substitute for imperfect markets. Secondly, we need to change our measures of economic success. While GDP is indispensable in short-run macroeconomic analysis, it does not account for the depreciation of assets and is therefore wholly unsuitable for identifying how to develop sustainably. Governments and businesses alike need to routinize natural capital accounting. This will serve as a critical step towards making inclusive wealth, and by which I mean the value of our produced human and natural capital, our key measure of progress. Just as we hand over assets to our children, and our children hand over assets to their children in the form of a home, maybe some shares, certainly education and culture. Those are assets. They are transmitted. Similarly, macroeconomic reasoning demands that we should measure the asset wealth of nations. Private companies produce balance sheets to augment their income expenditure accounts. So too, national governments should produce balance sheets to augment their income expenditure accounts. Finally, we must transform our institutions, particularly our financial and education systems, to enable those changes to take place at a global scale. Both public and private financial actors have a role to play in reorienting financial flows towards enhancing our natural assets, and far more support is needed to improve awareness among business and financial institutions of their dependencies, impact, and risks associated with the degradation of nature. As an example, the review recommends strongly that we adopt the sense of urgency that followed the Second World War, when we created international institutions like the World Bank and IMF, which supplies public goods, global public goods, for managing now, creating a new institution to monitor and manage our global public assets like the atmosphere and the oceans. There's no such discussion taking place at the moment. However, as much of nature is silent and invisible and mobile, institutions cannot be expected to eliminate all of the negative impacts our activities have on nature. Citizens have to serve both as judge and jury for their own actions. We need to be empowered not only to demand the changes that are needed in our demands on nature, and many of these demands are at the local level, but also to make informed decisions about our own individual impact on the natural environment. And that cannot happen without enabling us, above all through our educational policy, to understand and appreciate the workings of the natural world. So finally, the review concludes, because of the silence and invisibility of so much of the natural processes, such as things that are happening under our feet in the soils, that we need to understand it better than we do. Most of us are ignorant about all the processes that are taking place, giving us flourishing lives. I think the start of love affair is understanding the other person or the object of love. And as we grow more and more urban, our detachment from nature, our inquiry into the way nature operates, it's a very complicated object. We need to understand that. And for that, we need education from primary school right through tertiary education. In short, if we really care about ourselves and our descendants, we all ought to, in part, become naturalists. Thank you very much.
Well, we're very grateful for laying out some of the groundwork there, some of the realities that that the world faces. You know, it's often, mostly, as the professor said, the case that economics is divorced from our kind of ecological considerations. But if we continue to do that, then the future is very bleak, and there's no need to continue to do that. It is possible to make a change, but the time is short, people often say. I have one question in the chat so far, if I could address it to you. It says the report, that's your report, states that it's difficult to restore impaired systems, but the UN will soon start the decade on ecosystem restoration. Please comment on how we can support this work to restore nature.
Yes, well, thank you very much. It's a very important and deep question. It's difficult to restore. It's easier to preserve for very technical reasons.
Yeah.
The reverse route is harder. We simply need to invest in it. Invest means employ people to care about nature, care about the natural, to revive, let us say, a wetland. You need to forego certain pleasures we otherwise would. So you have to channel the investment towards nature as a productive asset. It's a very important question because intuitively when one asks what does investment mean, we think of digging up the soil, laying tarmac and having a drill, something very muscular. But when I talk about investing in nature, it's very passive. It's not muscular. It can even mean simply waiting. Plant a seed and don't touch it. Let it be. So waiting is a form of investment, and that's the cheapest form of investment in many ways.
That's a wonderful thing to put on your wall, I think, people. Waiting is a form of investment. Are there any other, let me just check, things in the chat for you? We have time probably for one more. There's quite a longish question here. Would Professor Dasgupta agree that when he calls for better education, that we could best begin with improved religious education? Fundamentalist followers need to understand cognitive metaphor theory, phenomenology, neuroscience, and how their research relates to the interpretation of miracles, for example. Well, there's a comment, a question, that stretches over into hermeneutics, into philosophy, into all the other departments that we're concerned with. Do you have is it possible to have a brief thought on that question?
Yes, I can be brief only because I'm such an inexpert on education. My comment, really, my urging the alteration of educational curriculum from the earlier stages was simply to add nature studies, so that in a particularly increasing urban environment, children can get a sense of what's out there, that gigantic machinery out there in all its glory. Nothing more than that, and that it shouldn't be forgotten. So just as we, at the earlier stages, we teach them language, reading, writing, and arithmetic, this idea was to introduce a quartet of subjects, final fourth on nature studies, and that it should not be forgotten. We should carry it with us as we go along. In American universities, for example, in your first 2 years, one of the compulsory courses, credit options, courses was on civilization, Civ, they called it. And so it's not unheard of for even undergraduates to have to go through one paper, which will involve field work, at least, so you can get a sense of it. That's all I had meant. Now, it should be augmented, no doubt, in many other ways, but I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we better pass on to the next contribution, but just say our enormous thanks to Professor Partha Dasgupta for the presentation and discussion there. I hope you're going to be able to stay with us for a little longer.
I'd like to.
We'll see how we go. Next on our list was Rita. So I'm going to hand over to Kusumita. I say Rita because our indigenous presenter has not managed to get into the room yet. I think they're trying. So let's just pass to Rita.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Well, it's really a great joy for me to introduce my dear friend and highly esteemed colleague, Dr. Rita Sherma. And Rita is the founding director and professor at the Shingal Center of Dharma Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. And she is also department chair of theology and ethics, and as well chair of Sustainability 360, an initiative at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And I should add that the GTU is the leading institution for graduate studies in the United States in theology and religious studies. And it has more than 20 member institutions and programs. And also Rita, I would like to also mention, is a founding vice president of the Dharma Academy of North America, which is over 20 years old. And I would like to mention it because I'm a very active member of that society myself since it started. And it's devoted to constructive theological work on the Dharma traditions of Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And Rita is a pioneer in constructive theology and ethics. And now we will be very happy to hear from her and not from me.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Pedersen. And I must say that having collaborated with you for all of these years has been a great joy and a privilege. So I want to thank you for that. I'm speaking from the Hindu tradition today, although I'm familiar with normally speaking out of the context of religion and ecological ethics in general. But speaking from the Hindu tradition, I would say that the wild and verdant places of the other than human world, the mountains, the forests, the sylvan banks of rivers, and wilderness as a whole, serve as a loci of revelation in the Hindu world. The banks of the Yamuna River, the forests, the groves, the meadows, in and around the pastoral village of Vrindavana are viewed as the sacred revelatory places of the terrestrial childhood and adolescence of the divine incarnation, Krishna. It is through the vivid visualization of the enchanting beauty of Vrindavana that the moments of revelation evinced by scriptural witness can be experienced through the refined imagination as sacred space and transcendent time in the immediacy of this present moment. And this holds true for so many scriptural passages where revelation occurs within these verdant spaces of the natural world, within the Himalayas, within forest groves, on river banks. And the gratitude-filled hymns of the Rig Veda and the Samaveda, two of the earliest set of texts of the canonical Vedas, express awareness of human interdependence with and awe in face of the abundance, majesty, and power of the natural phenomena around them. As a theologian of the divine feminine, from an ancient indigenous tradition that is now a contemporary global religion, I traverse by the light of the principle that holds as sacred the intrinsic and foundational value of the cosmogonic blossoming of divine creativity on earth, where the divine does not create the earth, but she becomes the earth. She becomes the sentience of beings, and she is the cosmos itself. The founding force then that gives meaning to life with this perception is the quest for communion with the divine, experienced through intimacy with creation. The fabric of Hindu thought from its inception has contained foundational strands informed by a deep gratitude for and profound interrelationship with the other than human world. In the massive canon of Hindu scripture, there are numerous hymns, narratives, and revelatory passages that reflect attunement with the rhythms of nature, wonder at the majesty and power of the elemental world. Millennia-old texts composed long before human subjugation of much of terrestrial life evince a surprising concern for human damage to and pollution of the earth, air, and bodies of water. One only wishes that contemporary Hindus would have the same feeling. Sacred praxis in the tradition often integrates the ecosphere either symbolically via representations of archetypal elements common to ancient cultures, earth, water, fire, air, space, or directly through rituals and venerations that materially incorporate plants, trees, flowers, rivers, sacred groves, mountains. Speaking for change from within an ecologically conscious civilization or religious culture, from within this 4 millennia old spirituality, means translating indigeneity globally, because we are now everywhere, across continents, and we are of many ethnicities, and we're of many different racial backgrounds and nationalities. And therefore, the translation of this indigeneity is very important across continents to create sacred affiliations with new rivers and mountains, new terrain that bears testament to the universal immanence of divine power and presence. Ecopraxis in this context seeks not only to harness amazement and awe for inner renewal and the raising of individual states of consciousness, but it also seeks to realize and live in awareness of connection with others in an interconnected web of being and becoming. When this understanding of our place in the world of elemental things speaks the language of mythos, it evinces the vision of the exquisite jeweled net of Indra, Indra being a luminous celestial found in the Vedas. The sparkling net of Indra is the symbol of interbeing, and it holds a jewel at each node, and they reflect each other in a lustrous lattice of interrelationality that alludes to the nature of reality as mutual causality and reciprocal conditioning in both Hinduism and Buddhism. As I write from the context and speak from the context of an American Hindu theologian, my work is to lead an ecopraxis that can create a spirituality of place in the American wilderness, find sanctity in her native ecosystems, know the presence of the divine through her woodlands and deserts, and sense the song of the sacred echoing through her mountains. This creates a sense of belonging to the land that is America and a connection to the communities that are her people, even as we honor the words and symbols that give voice to her highest telos. In relation to this Hindu-American effort, it is first necessary to recover the epistemologies of respect for the Earth's ecosystems before recontextualizing theoethics and theopraxis for a viable future. Hindu textual traditions, like others, can and should be eco-theologically re-envisioned for ecosystemic and societal sustainability, viability. The fabric of Hindu thought from its inception has contained this concept, strands which have been informed by a deep reverence for and profound intimacy with the natural world. There are, as we said, we will see, numerous passages in the vast corpus of Hindu scripture that reflect a sense of attunement with the rhythms of nature that echo the sage's awe and wonder at the majesty and power of the elemental world. The Hindu traditions are, as I had said, indigenous ecological spiritualities of place, the vast subcontinent wherein lies the source of the conceptual headwaters of the tributaries of thought and vision that came to be called the Hindu religion eventually, inspired an interrelationship and interwovenness of reciprocity and renewal between human communities and the natural world. Indigenous religions are worldviews rooted in ecosystems. The great diversity of ecosystems originally on the subcontinent, its massive Himalayan peaks, broad life-giving rivers that flow astride wide plains, vast tropical forests, charismatic megafauna, and numerous climatic zones, stirred awe, reverence, gratitude, and inspired theological visions of place and theopraxis and theoethics of the heart within the spirit of ancient seers who transmitted the Vedas to us. The earliest texts, the Hindu canon, the Vedas, they record the veneration of the elemental forms and phenomena of the natural world, and the people of the early Vedic era had a sense of reciprocal care in relation to the earth and the elements that produce both destruction and renewal, the winds, the fire, the waters, which were then sacralized and accorded a symbiotic status. This established a strong sense of interrelationship with the natural world. Humans in this worldview did not see themselves as separate and disconnected from the rest of the cosmos. Humans, animals, plant life, the sun, the moon, the stars, and indeed the entire cosmos were seen as one continuum. Humans, as participants in the cosmic drama, had a special obligation to acknowledge the sacred forces that gave rise to life not once, but on an ongoing basis, the continuity of divine creativity on earth. When the forces and phenomena that sustain life and fecundity were unacknowledged, unrecognized, and offered no reciprocal communion through prayers, reverence, or the offerings of the heart and spirit, they were weakened, dispersed, and their ability to bless, fructify, and nurture was considered to be reduced. As we know today, they are indeed reduced when we do not care for them. Because many Vedic rituals are still carried out, it is important to conceptualize this as an idea of an ecological consciousness viewed as necessary for the benefit of humanity and nature through the sacred act of eco-ritual. This is the theopraxis of the reciprocity of reverence. The indigeneity of the Hindu religion at its source, the Veda, is expressed through the sacred hymns, which are still chanted. And the Vedas marvel and exalt the nature of the earth, Prithvi, of the forests, of the rivers, and of the soil. The perception of the earth as mother and as a manifestation of the divine feminine supreme is first seen in the Prithvi Suktam of the Atharva Veda, that is the hymn to the earth, where the earth is eulogized as the lavish bestower of all precious things. But she's also the mother who deserves our respect and protection. The perception of earth as the mother that creates all life from her own being, and therefore as identified with the divine feminine who does the same to the cosmos, is highly significant for a constructive eco-theology and eco-praxis in the Hindu context anywhere in the world. Passages from the Prithvi Suktam refer to such an awareness, including the following: "The earth is my mother. I am the son of the earth. Upon the firm, broad earth, the all-begetting mother of the plants that is supported by divine law. Upon her, propitious and kind, may we ever pass our lives." Another passage reflects a deep concern for the well-being of the earth in a sacred text composed nearly 4 millennia before our planetary ecological catastrophe. The verse expresses a sense of responsibility for her care and preservation. "O earth, what I dig out of thee, what I get out of thee, quickly shall that grow again. May I not, O pure one, pierce thy vital spot, not thy heart." This sentiment is echoed again in the following passage, which expresses the recognition of the value of the rich wilderness by which the Vedic people were surrounded, as well as an assurance of protection from harm due to human settlement. "Thy snowy mountain heights, thy forests, O earth, shall be kind to us. The brown, the black, the red, the multicolored, the firm earth that is protected by Indra, I have settled upon, but not suppressed, not slain, not wounded. The hymn is an interesting testament to the clear awareness of the absolute dependence of humanity upon the earth for all needs. Everything that humans require and continue to use is mentioned in the hymn. The acknowledgement in itself is not adequate to engender an ecological consciousness, but it is a critical first step. And this is evidenced by our current calamitous relationship with the ecosphere at a time in which the global commercial culture does not recognize this integral dependence whatsoever. There is an urgency for this recognition to emerge again in our contemporary culture. Without such awareness, we will continue to live under the illusion that we are stewards. But the plunder and ravaging of the earth will not affect human lives, will not impact our capacity for stewardship, at least not the privileged ones. Immersed as the Vedic peoples were in the tropical biodiversity of vast forests, trees are also particularly understood to be animated by the power of divine presence. I present on this quite often in terms of contemporary botany of trees and what we're finding out about their sentience. Tree ceremonies are still performed by Hindus today. Large trees were once referred to as lords of the forest in the Rig Veda, and the plants and the foliage and that were used for medicinal or ritual purposes were offered prayers and gratitude. When a tree was cut down, concern for the injury inflicted was sacramentally expressed with the following prayer: Lord of the forest, grow forth again with 100 branches. May you grow with 1,000 branches. And so they were cut in such a way that they could regrow. Just as the individual tree is envisioned as the Lord of the forest and thought to contain a sentience, the forest itself is viewed as the sylvan form of the Devi Aranyani, the divine feminine in the form of forests. The awareness of trees as living, dynamic, sentient beings related to humans is well expressed in verses spoken by the great sage Yajnavalkya from the highly significant Brihadaranyaka Upanishad of about 900 BCE or earlier, which analogize the physiology of a great tree to that of a human being. It's an analogy that is very moving. And it's done in a form of questions, which leads eventually to his statement on the doctrine of revitalization, renewal, rejuvenation, rebirth. The Upanishadic principle of the identity of the self with Brahman, ultimate reality, is implicated in the passage, which views trees analogically in a way that is only appropriate in a culture that experiences deep interconnection with plant life. But the Chandogya Upanishad goes further still and describes a tree as having such a self, as a sentient, aware being infused with responsiveness, capable of pain and joy, the concern for and blessing of the entire ecosphere. Not only humans, not only one's tribe or community, not only one's nation, or even the human community worldwide, but the more than human world, which includes the human world, is beautifully expressed in this hymn, one of the Shanti Mantras from the Ajurveda. Om, may peace sweep across and through the skies and universally across the immense spaces. May there be peace on earth, peace in the waters, peace in all herbal plants, peace and flourishing in the trees and forests. May the divine realms be inundated with tranquility. In all that exists, may there be serenity. May all be calm and ever tranquil. Peace to all beings in all three realms of existence. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Rita. That was, oh, and we're thrilled that Uncle has now joined us, our Indigenous speaker. Welcome, Uncle. Rita, that was deep and also broad, erudite, and also very eloquent. And we have, if you have questions for Professor Sherma, all those in the audience, please post them in the chat. And one question is, how would you see a convergence between the experience of nature that you have so vividly described, and the spiritual experience of nature, being in the midst of nature, and the need to actually study nature or be educated, as Professor Dasgupta called for? There are a number of convergences in spite of difference in style between his presentation and yours. So in other words, experiential knowledge, scientific knowledge, how do the different kinds of knowledge and experience relate to each other?
It's a matter of how we approach scientific knowledge of the biosphere. If we approach it with a strictly mechanistic, materialistic viewpoint that seeks to know more just for the sake of knowing more, that's one thing. But if we use the epistemology of respect, then that very knowledge that we seek and the very process of seeking it through scientific means is itself what we would call sadhana. It is spiritual praxis. In fact, I was inspired to do my work because of what I have read in contemporary botany literature on plants and trees. And the entire vision that I put forth is a vision that is doubly inspired, once by scripture and praxis, and then on the other hand, by science itself and what it tells us. They're complementary, I would say, epistemologies.
Thank you. I have another question in the chat, which is, it's stated at length. I'll see if I can summarize. How can we relate the deep values that you have expounded with such intensity and clarity to active participation in economy or cultural politics of life? So how could we make a direct connection between the sacred scriptures and the insights that they bring to, for example, Extinction Rebellion, and also to questions of crime and mental health? It's a rather an inclusive question.
In fact, eco-psychology helps us here. Eco-psychology uses the kind of epistemology of reciprocity of reverence that I spoke about to heal, human minds. Of course, that doesn't take the place. This is very important that we understand that we're not trying to take the place of, science, geophysics, botany, medicine. What we're saying is that to that is all of our wellspring of resources within our spiritual traditions. And to answer that question very directly, I would say that when you do these actions, you know, I'm personally an advocate and an activist scholar. To me, that is part of my spiritual praxis. So, but you have to put you can't put the cart before the horse, in my view. That ecological consciousness must first arise, and then we engage in these activities of economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, and ecological restoration. And when we then do that, informed by the spiritual contemplative understanding of our relationship with the biosphere, then all of this work becomes itself part of our praxis.
Thank you so much. We have two questions in the chat that are actually asking, how can what you have expounded be related to the teachings of the Abrahamic traditions? One mentions Christianity in the Bible, the other Islam. And mindful of our time, I would say that that sort of dialogue between traditions is the purpose of this program, and that we should hold this until we have the general question and answer at the end. Alan, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Our time is moving on too quickly, so we need to go to Uncle.
First, I'd like to express our heartfelt welcome to Uncle Angaangaq, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Uncle. I've had the blessing of meeting Uncle a few times. He is a shaman and traditional healer from a family that bears this tradition of indigenous spirituality in the land of Greenland, which in their own language is called Kalaallit Nunaat. I'm sorry. And and I was asking whether it's permissible, Uncle, to refer to you as an Eskimo, and I was advised that you do refer to yourself as an Eskimo. Some others object to the term, but this we should be called what we wish to be called. And the people of the land of Greenland also, I believe, can be named as the Inuit. Now, Uncle has become one of the most eloquent and compelling voices worldwide on our broken relationship with nature, and on the question, the urgent issue his mother gave him as a mission when he was very young, melting the ice in the heart of man. And so since he was a youth, Uncle has been carrying this message to all parts of the world. And we're very, very grateful that you could be with us today, Uncle, for the indigenous, to provide an indigenous perspective on our questions.
I am so happy to see you again.
Thank you.
My name is Angaangaq, and it means the man who looks like his uncle. I was named after my father's older brother, whose name is Koyagi, which means the beloved one. He was named after his uncle Angaangaq, who was named after his uncle Koyagi. So I go a long way back in time. And it's really interesting, some years ago, that UNESCO came on the invitation of my government to make my grandmother's land a sacred land for heritage land. And the scientists have been studying my grandmother's land and are now determined that my family has lived there for a bit more than 6,000 years. So it's a long time I have lived on that land. I come from the most desolate and isolated place on earth. And today, only 60,000 people of my people live. And I'm part of the Eskimo family. In our country, we call ourselves Kalaallit, which means people. Our land is called Kalaallit Nunat, which means the land of the people. We're part of the North American continent. And so, and the fascinating part of it is that my land has become the very center, the ground zero for the climate change and environmental devastation we all are experiencing, caused by ourselves, the mankind. It's so interesting. In 1978 in August, I was in New York to environmental gathering of the United Nations, and I spoke about the melting of the big ice. My people noticed the melting of the big ice starting in 1963 in the month of January. There are many, many fingers of the big ice of Greenland. It's a big, big, big country. And that finger is on my grandmother's land, which is now my land, which now I'm the oldest one. That finger was about 2 kilometers wide and 1,500 meters tall. In the month of January, water was dripping out of the big ice way up there somewhere. Now, it has been minus 35 Celsius for at least 3 months then. And we know by science that minus 35 Celsius, nothing should be flowing of water. It should be solidly frozen, but it wasn't. Then in the month of March, the elders themselves went hunting. And again, you go and touch the big ice in their gratitude to the Great One that they've been able to have a good hunt and do the ceremony in the gratitude to him, the man who made us. And they noticed that the water was dripping from that wall, 1,500 meters tall wall. And it's so interesting that and then we call it a phenomena has happened now in our country. And it turned out to be the climate change. So in 1975, 13 years later, in the month of August, I spoke at the United Nations in New York City. And I did get a standing ovation. I was really proud. You know, my first big meeting of the environment of the world sent by the elders. And it was so interesting. I was called well-spoken young Eskimo. A big applause. It made me so proud. I ran home to Greenland and my mom and dad invited all the elders so I can report back to whom I met, what I saw, what I experienced, and what I heard. So I did that. And then it's so interesting that I told him that I spoke at United Nations, the world government. And one of the elders in his 90s whispered to me, my son, do they own the earth, that government, United Nations? Because in his country, Danish government owned our country. They were not invited, but they took our land. So I didn't quite know how to answer that beautiful man who is now long gone to the next world. I touched my heart for him. It's really interesting what has happened then. We grew up, I was born into what you would call the Stone Age. And there, we grew up as children. I'm now 73 years old. It's going to be 74. Holy shit, I'm old. I'm sorry. I didn't think I was that old. But we grew up to be caretakers and custodians of Mother Earth, what's on her and what's within her. We were supposed to be taking care of that. And we did. And we did that. But now, because the way mankind on Earth lived in a hunger for more economy, hunger for more jobs, development, they raped the Earth and didn't care for what happened to Earth. I just came from a meeting of the elders in North America and South America. And they were talking about when they went to Kuwait to bomb, and then Iraq and Afghanistan and all these countries. They were bombing the earth, destroying our own home. And they call themselves educated and civilized people, killing people and destroying the earth we live on. Yes, we are many now, and we have done very little to protect the land, the only earth we know. And so what has happened now, the big ice is melting so badly, you have no idea. There are many, many fingers of the big ice holding on to my land. And one of them is right on my land. Every time now, already now at the end of April, the rivers are running, melting of the big ice. And that little river, I took some spiritual leaders up there, and I took the Vice President of the United States up there, and that I took many leaders of the world to the land so they can see themselves without politicizing their visit to what actually is happening. One day, I took all the spiritual leaders from around the globe, and then it was really cloudy and rainy. No, not rainy, it's cloudy and frosty. I went to the river, which is just a kilometer and a half away from the camp. There was no river. And I've been telling you how fast, ferociously the river runs. I was shocked that there was no river. And here I am, have taken people from all over the world, from Australia, from India, from Africa, from South America, North America, Europe. And I had nothing to show them for. And then a day later, the sun came out in the morning because it is 24-hour sunlight at home. So the sun came out of the clouds, and then, so I told the gathering, let's go back to the river. So I want to see how she's doing now. That little river ran more than 1 million liters per second. Just to give a comparison to you who are listening, I don't know if you have heard about some river called Niagara Falls in Canada and United States. That river runs 750,000 per liters per second. One river in Greenland was running more than 1 million liters per second. And there are 10,000 of them. So Greenland has become the ground zero of climate change, which of course has been caused by many things in the world. And it's so interesting what has led up to that ecology which is so incredibly precious to all of us, because that's the one which the first speaker says that none of us can live without nature. We need the nature. And what happened is that 45 years ago, the educated people of the world decided that we should not hunt seals anymore because the eyes are very beautiful and they shouldn't be hunted. 45 years later, there are 15 million approximately seals between the waters of the coast of West Greenland and Baffin Island, which is only 300 kilometers long. 15 million seals, and they eat fish. And it is so interesting. I was a speaker at the Vatican a few years ago, before the pandemic. They cannot eat fish anymore on Fridays because there are too many seals. So people didn't understand the impact of hunting the seal, managing the seal population, and providing fish to the world. There was unequal imbalance completely. And today we're suffering that the world is running out of fish. Now they are overfishing everything. And the seals go hungry, they lose their skins, the furs of the skins, sick. And we do that over and over again all over the world. Then, of course, on top of that, because there's so many rivers out of Greenland in the summer, running for 5 months, the ocean is rising and rising and rising. So the coastal cities and coastal countries will not have enough land. And is that really true that the water is rising? It is so interesting when you talk to the old people back home, they would say that little bit of ocean rising, the waves would be 10 times bigger. And lo and behold, science has now proven a little bit of rise of the ocean level, the waves and the winds become bigger. And it's so interesting that those old people who had never gone to school knew all this knowledge, which now science is proving is true. Now, unfortunately, we have not listened to them. I have now spoken at the World Parliament of Religions 4th time today, and I really pray that somehow you and I, we will come to an understanding of ourselves and with the others that we need to do things differently, because the way we're doing things has not slowed down the climate change. 45 years ago, we had a chance, but we didn't believe it. We didn't believe the native people. We didn't believe the only people on earth who live with the big ice is my people. The only people on earth. We have lived with that big ice longer than anyone else on earth. And so we can smell her. We can feel her on our body. And when we touch her, she's become soft, not stone hard. And my mother, before she died, she told us, I never dreamt that I will ever be touching the big ice being soft. She died 25 years ago. This is a woman who has such incredible visionary wisdom brought to her by ancestors, that she never believed that she will ever touch the big ice soft. And she did touch the big ice, and it was soft on surface because of the heat. One day on the big ice itself in Angaangaq, where I come from, it was 37 Celsius. The big ice literally was boiling, melting in tons of water. The rivers and the lakes on the top of the ice are so big, some of them more than a kilometer deep. And the rivers are so ferociously strong that they were stronger than Niagara Falls. So what are we doing now? We are still talking about it. When I spoke first time in 1975, in the month of August, we're still talking and we still haven't come to an understanding. So my indigenous family said, you had to come to Paris. It is important. I said, no, I don't want to go to another meeting because there's going to be another meeting. And they called me up after they had signed agreement. And I looked at them and they said, you know, it's just a piece of paper they signed. And lo and behold, it was just a piece of paper they signed. Because nobody had changed policies. Nobody has changed politics. They're still hunting for the minerals on our lands, indigenous lands. They're still raping the earth. They're cutting the trees. I took my eldest to Amazonia. My great aunt, 89 years old. And my uncle, 84 years old. I took them to Amazonia. And then they were so surprised to see when we flew over how much had been felt by educated people. And I say with really strong words, educated people were cutting the forest for benefit for the economy. And they forgot that they live on earth with us. But we didn't matter to them. You didn't matter. None of you mattered for that economy in Brazil. What kind of economy are we creating by destroying the earth? What are we expecting out of that? Now we know why the Amazonian people have prophecy that their land will sink into the ocean. Now it makes sense that Amazonia will sink in most of your lifetimes. Why? Antarctica and Greenland are melting ferociously every hour, 24 hours a day in the summer. Is that really true that it is so? Yes, unfortunately, it is true. I was back home back in the early 80s, and a big plane left for Copenhagen, and I saw a man sitting in a canteen at the airport, sitting alone. So I went up to him because I go and greet people. That's what my job is. So I gave him a hug and a sniff and told him, "Oh, you use Nivea cream?" And he said, No, I don't use Nivea. And I said, "Oh, where are you from?" "I'm from Colorado," he said. "Oh, what brings you here?" I said, "I am an expert on the big ice," he said. And I was so excited that, "Oh, have you spoken to my elders?" You know his answer? "I never spoken to these elders because I've gone to school and they haven't."
Uncle, we're almost out of time to go, need to go to questions.
No, that attitude they had. Nobody of the scientists has spoken to the elders about what it means that the ice is melting. We had to begin to honor each other and respect each other. And we haven't done that. And we keep talking about there's only one earth and mankind who are citizen. It is like words with no meaning. So I pray today that you and I will come to a better understanding that we really need to be very different tomorrow than we were yesterday. Otherwise, millions will lose their homes in my lifetime. Sorry I took so much time of your time. I apologize for it. When I get going, I just don't know how to stop.
Your time is perfect, but it's my job to give the alert. So it's perfect. And okay, so we have 2 questions in the chat that actually are the same, are similar. One is, when you speak of prayer, Uncle, could you say more about your religion, as we call it? And also a question about this spirituality and the sense of the sacred. And since you often speak of the heart, is spirituality in the heart?
I'm so glad that you asked that question. Yes, on July 3rd this year, in Greenland, in West Greenland, we will celebrate 300th year anniversary of Christianity. Later on, in September, in East Greenland, they will celebrate 100 years of arrival of Christianity. So Christianity is very new to us. And the concept they come with is so different from what we grew up with. Because we look at the world as our home. They seem to be looking at the religion being the home wherever they are. And they're only a little part of the world. So what is the difference in terms of the religion, I honor every single prophet on earth, and there are 9 of them, 9 big ones on earth. And everyone has so different understanding of a religion is that today we still kill each other because of religion. In terms of spiritual understanding in the shamanic tradition, I have never met someone in the shamanic tradition in indigenous world where I have traveled who fights, because they deal with the spirit of a human. The idea is to lift each other's spirit, not to make yourself more better than the other, more educated, more rich, or better religion. No, that's not what we will unite you and I. What will unite you and I is that spirit in your heart. How do we know about your spirit? When you smile, you melt the ice in our heart. So that's the essence of spirituality.
Are there any, okay, one more question, Alan, if we have time. How to give a last question, then the next speaker. How can we have better relations between the generations, because elders need to receive respect?
We need to talk. We need to hug. We need to hug each other. We need to sniff at each other, so we can know the emotions we are in at the moment when we meet. We had to learn to touch our heart, to say that my heart belongs to you. And you need to learn to touch your heart and give it away, so I can feel that your heart also belongs to me. Because we don't talk. And remember, whatever has happened in our life, it has an intergenerational impact. We can see that in North America, how they have become so racist today, and they talk about like it is new. No, racism has always existed, and extremism have always existed. It's just sometimes we give into them, and then some bad things happen. And today, 2021, at the end of April, we have never been closer to another big war as we are now. And what are we going to do? Should we allow us kill each other, or should we attempt to understand each other better? The choice is yours. I have chosen to give you a hug and a sniff. Will you do the same to me? That's the spirit of a human. Thank you for allowing me to be present at your gathering. Bring my greetings to the families, wherever you are.
Okay, I think it is time now that we should move on, but we're hugely grateful to Uncle for that presentation. We should all somehow, I think, do a hug.
And I sniff at you. I probably will tell you that you use L'Oreal.
Not always pleasant. So we must press on, and it's my great pleasure now to introduce Charanjit Ajit Singh to the meeting. She is a very valued member of the World Congress of Faiths, part of the executive committee and a vice president. She's been involved in interreligious work for many years, including attendances at the Parliament and the World Council of Churches. So she's well known as a speaker on Sikh perspectives at conferences and seminars and so on around the world, always challenging the religions to live up to their best moral selves. She's had a career in England in education, amongst other things, especially as a government inspector in schools. In 2001, she published an anthology, The Wisdom of Sikhism, through the publishers One World in Oxford. So she believes passionately in linking faith-based spirituality to environmental concerns, recognizing the interdependence of all life and the fragile nature of the earth, and in working towards the survival of endangered species and their habitats. So I'm going to bring her in now and ask her to speak on Sikh perspectives on our theme of ecology and spirituality. Charanjit.
Alan, I really feel very small having heard all our excellent scholars and experts in the various fields, and of course the elder who has just shared his thoughts with us. I mean, as a Sikh, find it very difficult sometimes to think in terms of what is it that we as humans do to our Mother Earth. And I was looking at the ecological stuff in relation to the science and other things, and I'm not a scientist, so therefore I would not understand much. But what I see reflected in the lives of the Sikh gurus and their wisdom is abundantly reflected in our scripture called Sri Guru Granth Sahib, which is, by the way, the first interfaith anthology in the world, because it covers the writings of Hindu and Muslim saints from 12th century to 1604, when the scripture was installed in Harimandir Sahib, which is also known as the Golden Temple, and then the writings of the 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, were put in later on. Now, Guru Tegh Bahadur's 400th birth anniversary is going to be celebrated worldwide on 1st of May. So I thought I should mention. And he is known to have sacrificed his life so that people who belong to another faith could live. So the first example of a sacrifice, not for your own personal belief, but for somebody else's belief. According to one of the Sikh academics, Professor Gurbachan Singh Bachchan of Guru Nanak Dev University, Guru Nanak, who was the founder of the Sikh Faith, he says his philosophy provides harmonious balance in nature. He develops upon the dynamic ecological cycles in nature. His concept of ecology are not merely of physical or cultural nature, as is the viewpoint of modern scientists, but he has elaborated on spiritual ecology as well. We have talked about, I think everybody has touched on what has happened during the last so many centuries and how we have, as humans, created planetary problems. We as Sikhs, from our religious background and spiritual background, feel that solutions also lie deeply in our own thoughts and practices. A renowned Sikh scholar, scientist and ecologist, Dr. Gopal Puri, he used to be in Liverpool in the UK. He has done quite a lot of work in analyzing the verses of Sri Guru Granth Sahib and the actions of mankind to live in ecological harmony. The Sikh faith is 553 years old. I think quite a number of you would know that. A contemporary of the Anglican Church and the Lutheran Reformation. 3 years ago, the Sikhs across the globe celebrated the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak. And the key feature of the celebration was to plant 1 million trees in different parts of the world, including here in the UK, as well as many seminars, conferences, recitations, music events, exhibitions. Homing in on Guru Nanak's love of nature, and in my humble opinion, I think the Guru was the first Sikh spiritual ecologist. I would like to quote a verse from his writing in the Sikh scripture, which to me covers what spirituality is about, and it definitely looks to me beyond the confines or barriers of religion or belief. Jo Brahmande, soi pinde, jo dise so pave. Whatever exists in the universe, in the multiverse, is in the human body. Only the one who has a vision, special eyes to see, can access it. And in our early morning service, in every Sikh place of worship, there is recitation and singing of Asa Di War, the ballad of hope. And of course, COVID regulations permitting. And out of the many verses which Guru Nanak has given us, the singing is Balihari Kudrat Vasya. Rejoice in the infinite who resides in nature. It instructs us to remember that we are all but a small part of God's creation. And all living beings have one sustainer. May we never forget that. It is also made clear that God spoke once and there was creation. That's what our belief is. And another verse which I think puts us as human beings in our place when we think that we humans, we know best. Samund Shah Sultan Girha Seti Maltan Kidi Tulna Homni Jetis Murnavisar. That is, great king emperors who have vast kingdoms and treasures cannot match an ant from whose mind the Lord is never absent. And in the same prayer is said, humans, trees, holy places, coasts, clouds, fields, islands, continents, universes, spheres and solar systems, life forms, egg-born, womb-born, earth-born, sweat-born. Only God knows their existence. In oceans, mountains, everywhere. Nanak says, God created them and takes care of them. And the last verse of the prayer is, Pavan Guru Pani Pita Mata Tat Mahat. Air is the Guru, water the Father, earth the great Holy Mother. Day and night, the male and female nurses in whose laps the whole world plays. The judge of righteousness keeps an account of our good and bad deeds. The approval and rejection comes from our own actions. Meritorious deeds unite us. Misdeeds get us thrown back in the cycle of transmigration. Those who dwell on Nam that is prayer, spirituality, meditation, gain hard-earned success, and are honored and glorified in the Lord's court, and many others are also released with them. This particular hymn, which I have just recited, was adopted as the Sikh anthem for the environment at the end of the last century. So it's used quite extensively. And the birthday of the seventh Guru, Guru Har Rai, whose medicinal orchard was very well appreciated and still is very much part of the Sikh tradition of healing, cured many, including Dara Shikoh, the son of Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, and it is also the first day of the Sikh calendar, and it's become the Sikh Environment Day. So it comes in mid-March. I think we have heard about whether human is a steward of God's creation or part of God's creation, and that continues to be the controversy which happens within communities as well. But we have responsibility as humans that we take care of our environment and not exploit it as we have been doing. And that is part of our commitment to our faith and to our fellow beings with whom we share the planet. The faith teaches that the natural environment and the survival of life forms is closely linked to the rhythm of nature. In the world God has created, He has provided each species and humans with means of support and nurturing. And we should not forget that we are also part of that divine light. Our problem tends to be that sometimes at an individual level we forget where we have come from and how we are connected. However, while one wants to be uplifted as part of the divine, we do not always see the divine in others. Spirituality transcends physical and bodily barriers and is transformational. Guru Amar Das, the third Guru, says, "O my body, God installed the light in you. That is why you came into this world." So one pathway we usually hold on to in times of crisis and tragic events as people of faith, and of course no faith, is that we gather together in observing silence, which to me symbolizes the channeling of our collective spiritual energy for peace and harmony within and without. We also, as part of the Dharmic traditions, the Sikhs, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains, we believe in transmigration of soul and this special human life. And according to my tradition as a Sikh, this life has come after millions of life forms. And our purpose is to get back to the divine, to merge in the divine, and to become one. And it's not only the salvation which we are seeking. And of course, there is acceptance of other religions as different parts to the divine. And we
Charanjit, I
pray,
wonder if we could come to
okay,
close.
all right. Just wanted to say quickly that quite a number of Sikh organizations have done quite a lot of work in relation to working to preserve, to support and the environmental actions of others, particularly after the 550th anniversary of the Gurus. And just want to say something about Bhagat Puran Singh, who was the founder of Pingalwara, which is an abode for the disabled, the organization which is at the forefront of ecological innovation at present. He, early in the 20th century, succinctly put what as Sikhs we should be doing to protect and sustain ourselves and our earth home. He says, preserve natural resources, service of the poor and destitute is the service of God. Plant more and more trees to save the environment. Wear khadi clothes, that's are the plant-based clothes, to lessen unemployment. Simple living and high thinking is a bliss. Use less diesel and petrol. Exercise restraint in your living habits. Do not forget to plant trees. They are the sign of the prosperity of a nation. This was said about 60 years ago, when nobody was talking of diesel and petrol having such adverse effects on our environment. Therefore, as humans, our actions and pathways should be twofold. And I quickly just say, one is prayer and meditation as part of our tradition, and the other is supporting fellow beings, developing harmonious relationships with others, serving others, not just our families and communities, but also those who are needy and those who are less fortunate than ourselves. Taking care of the environment, overcoming our greed and desires, and leading an ethical life. Every Sikh prayer ends with the words Sarbat da Bhala, which is for the good of all, humans and everything in nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Charanjit. Thank you. Well, good. A plea there for unity and care of the earth for one another and so on. Someone's written in the chat, caring for others, all life, our earth, her soil, her waters, the air. This is precious. Thank you. Thank you from someone else for shining a light on our innate unity. So these are comments rather than questions as such, but you know, worth hearing and feeding back to all of us as what they have taken from your good words, Charanjit.
Thank you.
I've certainly heard the emphasis on trees before in the Sikh tradition, a lot. That's rather nice that we had this again. Maybe you could supply some ice also to Greenland to help
Well,
them.
I just wanted to say something. You know, India at this moment in time is very much under pressure because of COVID.
Sure.
And the two pieces of news which have come about, that langar is usually, the Sikh free kitchen is usually in relation to vegetarian food, but they have also started oxygen kitchen, which they are providing in the Gurdwara in a number of places in order for helping those people who are not able to get oxygen. So that's one. And the other is, you know, so many people are dying at the moment. And so it's very, very difficult to take care of them. So a number of groups within the Sikh community, United Sikhs, have taken on the responsibility of bearing with the Muslim community, their dead with dignity, and cremating Hindus according to their traditions with dignity. That has happened during the last week.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
I thought I should mention that it's important that we understand that as Sikhs, we have responsibility not just for Sikhs, but for others too.
Thank you. Okay, it's a good point, and it's well taken. Yeah. We are going to have to move on now to our next presenter, Imam Saffet Catovic, who has been waiting very patiently and listening. He has the advantage of having heard everybody. But he's a man of many parts, I'm told. He's named as a community organizer, an activist, and environmental leader on the EarthX website. I don't know whether he wrote those words or whether someone wrote them about him. But for our purposes, he's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament and a part of the Climate Action Task Force. He's a founding member of the Global Muslim Climate Network. But actually, there's very few Muslim initiatives in the realms of climate and environment that Saffet is not part of. At least that's what I'm picking up. He's written numerous articles published in various journals and magazines, and given talks and so on, lectures at various forums and conferences and webinars, all impressive achievements. But he has many involvements and commitments that he's given himself to in this whole realm of climate and ecology. I'm going to end the little introduction by recalling that he was selected by the Obama White House, he likes this, I'm sure, to join a select group of faith leaders from across the US in order to advise on issues of environmental stewardship and climate change. So that's an impressive record there. So Imam Saffet, we welcome you to our seminar and look forward to your wisdom on our theme. Thank you. You need to unmute, which you've just done.
Thank you very much. Salam alaikum, greetings of peace, belated Ramadan Mubarak, the blessings of Ramadan for all of you. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity and the blessing to be with all of you today and to learn from the esteemed presenters and speakers, my brothers and sisters who spoke before me. Indeed, I have the benefit of and the blessing of learning from all of you and appreciate very much your sharing and your inspiration and your wisdom. For if nothing else can be said, and I always think about the irony of it. Here we are talking about Mother Earth, climate change, and we are doing so via the internet. I always want to think about the irony of that, given that technology is a double-edged sword. The genie cannot be put back in the bottle, but it is a way in which we are able to connect, and we look forward to the day when we can, as our uncle told us, hug one another in person, not virtually, and be able to sniff one another, to experience one another viscerally as social beings. And that God bless us to see this day, and that God grant health to those who are sick and afflicted, and remove the sickness and remove this pandemic from us, lift it from all of us. And the reality is, the world has not experienced something like this before. And all of our faith traditions go back in various periods of time in history and places that are not like today. And the answers and the revelation and the teaching and the wisdom and the instruction and the guidance which they brought are beautiful gems and wisdom. But I think, in my personal view, in order for us to successfully confront the existential threat which all human beings and creation upon this planet is facing, we all have pieces of the puzzle. We all have parts of the answer, and we need to all come together in order to provide the full answer. And so I thank the World Congress of Faiths for hosting this, along with the Parliament of the World Religions here on the other side of the pond. And I always like to begin by recognizing the idea in the Muslim tradition, or in the words of the Quran, when Muslims place the bodies and honor, as our sister mentioned, honor those who have passed away before us, and it's been very challenging to honor them during these days of COVID, when some of even the rites and the rituals by which we're able to honor those who have passed away have been limited because of certain COVID restrictions. When we place our brother or our sister into the earth, and we accompany them to their next phase of existence, we continue to consider to be the life of the grave, we do so and we enter into that place, that sacred place, that place of memory, that place of history, and the place of destiny, for we too will go there one day. And we recognize the place of history by saying "Antum sabikun wa nahnu lahikun" as part of a larger supplication that we give, or blessing that we give when we come to the grave, the homes of the graves. And it means we give honor, and we respect, and we remember those who came before us, for surely we are coming after them. Where they are going, we shall follow. And so we have to recognize, and I think this is a good practice for all of us to do, to acknowledge that, for example, I'm coming to you from my place in Central Jersey, my home in Central Jersey in the United States. This is the ancestral lands of the Lenape peoples, the indigenous peoples of this land, a people who were part of a dynamic and diverse civilization, who existed before those who claimed to come and discover them believed that they discovered something. They were already here. They did not need to be discovered. But whose relationship with Mother Earth was one of balance and harmony and respect, as our brother uncle has so beautifully articulated, in the language of the heart, by the language of the heart. And we have to honor and acknowledge that there is very much a crying need today, more so than ever before, for that ancient wisdom, for the understanding of the indigenous peoples. And I feel a special kinship myself personally to the indigenous peoples, because my paternal father and grandparents came from the indigenous Muslim peoples of Europe, from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And not to belittle my maternal side. My maternal side my maternal grandfather and grandmother come from Scotland and Liverpool, respectively, before they came here to the United States, the other side of the pond. I do regret still that we are separated by a common language, but in any case, English is English and American English is English too. But we can bridge that gap, God willing, inshallah. So we have to recognize that reality. The second point that I want to mention is we find ourselves during this month of Ramadan, and Ramadan for the Muslims is the month in which the revelation of the Holy Quran began, according to Muslim tradition, given to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over 1400 years ago. And the location is important where he received the revelation. It was in the cave of Hira, in the mountain of light outside the outskirts of Mecca, where he would often go to contemplate, to reflect upon the inequities that he saw in the society that he was a part of, being part of the privileged class of that society, and seeing the wrongful and injustices that were carried out by that class against the other members of the human family. And he was looking for justice and seeking for understandings of how this is fair. And one of those occasions, while he was in seclusion in that cave of Hira on the mountain of light, he receives an interaction with, according to Islamic tradition, the Archangel Gabriel, the angel of revelation. And the Archangel Gabriel comes into his presence and embraces him. There's a long, detailed story, but basically begins his initiation into the prophethood and messengership. Muslims hold that he was the seal of prophets and messengers, all those who came before him, according to some traditions, over 126,000 who came to humanity, selected to share the way in which we can live in harmony with one another and in harmony with the world. And unfortunately, over time, people have not heeded those directions and those guidances. And what happened in this interaction with the angelic being, the command came, Iqra. It's the first verse of the 96th chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Alaq. Iqra, read. The Prophet Muhammad, like many of his contemporaries, was ummi. He was unlettered. He was illiterate, to use a modern terminology, unable to read and write. And he answers the angelic being, Archangel Gabriel. He says, Ma ana biqari. I cannot read. And the instruction came again, read, Iqra. He said, Ma ana biqari. I cannot read. And then the third time, when he was instructed to read, the Prophet says, what shall I read? And then the first 5 verses, according to Muslim tradition, of the 96th chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Alaq, which translates as that which clings, were revealed. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaqa. Read in the name of your Lord who created. Read the verses of creation that are all around you. Read the signs of God. The term in Arabic for signs of God, as some of you may know, is ayah. Read the signs of God, but that is also a term that is used to describe the sentences within the Holy Scripture of the Quran. They're also called ayah. The book of Revelation is written in signs, verses, and the book of creation is written in signs and verses. And so God, through the Archangel Gabriel, instructs the prophet, your first source of knowledge precedes belief. Your first source of knowledge is that you read the signs around you, read the signs within the natural world. Those point to something greater than yourself. They point to the creator of both you and those signs, those fellow creations. And through understanding the signs within the natural world, you will begin to understand your role within it. For as has been aptly said by some of my brothers and sisters who have spoken before, and in the language of the Quran, Al-khalqu as-samawati wal-ard akbar min khalqi an-nas. The creation of the heavens and earth is much greater than you, O human beings. Hubris is part of our problem. Arrogance is part of the problem of the human species. And God says, know your place. The creation of the heavens and earth is greater than you. So we need to embrace, to understand, to learn from the created world. There are 750 verses in the Holy Quran, according to the various Quranic commentators, that speak to or speak about nature or natural processes, physical systems, natural phenomena. 38 on my counting, 31 on others' counting, of the chapter titles of the 114 chapters of the Holy Quran are specific references to nature or natural phenomena. I just talked about Surah Al-Alaq, that which clings. Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest chapter in the Holy Quran, the second chapter is called the cow. And there's Surah Al-Ra'id, thunder, and so on and so forth. Surah Al-Ankabut, causing some commentators to point out that the Quran is a collection of stories about animals and plants. And to this I say, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad that the world is finally coming around to realize that's where we need to understand our existence and our interconnectivity.
Imam Saffet,
Yes.
I hope you can bring us to a close in a minute.
Oh, it's okay. I know that as the Islamic faith is the last faith, so we get to have the concluding moment. So I appreciate being given that moment, even though I have.
It's just the time against us.
I understand. In short, we need to reset, according to Islamic tradition, the balance. That balance that we talked about before, that the indigenous peoples of the world know very well as part of their way of being in the world. The Quran uses the term mizan, and we need to reset that balance. We have disrupted the balance and it needs to be reset. We need to embrace all those who exist within the world as not just fellow creatures, but within the Islamic tradition, they are also fellow worshipers of God. In the Quranic language, each being knowing their mode of prayer and glorification of the Lord. We have to move away from a post-industrial revolution mindset, which our professor spoke so articulately before, in that anything in nature is the sum total value of its profitability to us, its material aspects, and recognize there are spiritual, there are intelligence aspects to that, there are living aspects to that, and that they are part and parcel of this earth, which we all call home, but with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said is actually a sacred place, a place of worship. Al-ard kulluha masjida. The entirety of the earth is a mosque and a place of prayer. We need to honor our neighbors, human and non-human, who share this planet with us, and recognize our rights and responsibilities. And we need to do so, not just for us, but for the future generations. Limited resources is how economists and others define what the natural world is. Limited resources, we view it as blessings, but not countless blessings. We need to ensure that those blessings continue to the generations which come after us, as we were able to succeed because of the blessings left for us by the generations that preceded us. And finally, as a share for commonality, or call for commonality or common understanding, within the Muslim tradition also, we use the metaphor of mother in connection to the earth. Al-ard, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Tahfidu min al-ard fa innaha ummakum." Take care of the earth, for she is your mother. There is nothing that you do to her or on her, both the positive and the negative, except that she will report on it. She will cry out about what has been done to her. Mother Nature is crying out. We are part of the cause of that pain. We need to realize that. And we also need to realize, and I'll conclude with this in the last moment, we need to realize that not all, while all are responsible, not all are equally guilty. When we talked about earlier about human consumption and 1.6 Earths, it depends, Professor, and I know he knows this very well, about what part of the earth you're talking about. If people live like we live, for example, here in America, and maybe in Europe for that matter, I don't know the exact numbers, but just in America itself, we would need 6 planet Earths, not 1.6, in order to take care of the needs if everyone in the world lived as we live. We have to recognize our privilege and our responsibility, and that all are equally responsible. And in the geopolitics of the world, that means the global north has a very special responsibility to the harm that they have already caused to the global south. And a simplistic answer, and I see Dr. Kusumita waving her hand, the simplistic answer is that you don't need to have the same access to electricity, to technologies as we do. No, 800 million people who are energy deprived need to have access, but they need to have access in a renewable way, and not to be punished for the sins of those in the north. So this needs to be taken into consideration as we move forward. Let us move forward together to answer the cries of Mother Earth. Let us worship together in this entirety of the earth that is a place of prayer and worship. And let us remember, as we place our brothers and sisters in the ground who have died from COVID and for other illnesses and our loved ones, that we also have been the cause of death of many of the fellow worshipers on this planet, this house of worship of God. Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace.
Thank you, Imam Saffet. Thank you very much for your wisdom to us, extensive, stemming from Quran and experience. Number of people have written in chat just their appreciation of it. They've not given a question as such, but want to thank you, one particularly, for the thread of, they've called it the thread of universality that you've spoken about so beautifully. And I think that's true of the Islamic tradition in many, many respects. We have run out of time in a way, but I'm going to run and call upon Kusumita to see if she has a minute or two reflection for us as a kind of summary. Kusumita is on the Board of Trustees of the Parliament, of course, and is a great friend of the World Congress of Faiths. In personal terms, she's been a student of the Indian sage Sri Chinmoy for many years, 50 years, I gather, and has published several essays on his philosophy and poetry. But she's been involved in the whole interfaith and ecological movement within that for many years, and brings her own perspective. So, Kusumita, you need to unmute.
I'm keenly aware that I need to get this into about a minute.
Yeah.
It's like giving a prayer in an interfaith service. You have 90 seconds,
Yeah.
So I'm going, without mentioning all the presenters one by one, as I would do if I had time for a real response, and your names, I'm just going to try to respond to that call for what are the universal themes, what are the things we hear in common. And first, we are in need, a drastic, urgent need in the climate emergency of a total transformation, the reset. And it's a transformation of our concepts of nature and our relation to nature, our practices, our educational institutions, and our other institutions. And in this transformation, knowledge and experience of nature has to play a huge part, as it has in the traditions through the, sorry, let me get rid of this. Knowledge and experience of nature, as it has through the centuries in our faith traditions. We need science, scientific knowledge of nature, listen to the science, as Greta says. We need knowledge of nature in conventional education, formal and non-formal. And we need the spiritual experience of nature and being immersed in nature, eco-practice, the realization of interbeing, what traditions differ on their accounts theologically of this, but the divine presence in nature, or the sacramentality of nature, the integrality of the divine, the transcendent and the immanent, the divine and the natural, in some traditions a large gap, in others a strong continuity, but the light and presence is there, and we need to love it and experience it. And for me personally, a question is, what if people are deprived of this? If they live in cities, they've never been instructed in this. We need to attend to that, the nature deficit psychologists are talking about. And then I am going to mention one person by name, and that's Uncle. Uncle didn't use this expression, but it's about keeping faith. A prophecy was delivered by holy people. A teaching came from ancestors. A warning was given. It was not received. It was not heeded. It was ignored. Promises were made, but they weren't kept. So it's a keeping faith. The alternative is choose respect, choose love for one another, choose the way of the heart, the spirituality of the heart. And so we're all, so that is the kind of an attempt to summarize. We're responsible for one another. We must commit ourselves and reinvent ourselves. And in closing, I'd like to say that this wonderful dialogue was inspired in part by a book that I was involved in called Faith for Earth, A Call for Action. And it was published jointly by the Parliament of the World's Religions and the UN Environment Program. And this book is, you can download a PDF of the entire book at the Parliament of the World's Religions website or at the UN Environment Program website under resources. So please, the PDF is free. Please go and get it and read it, and you will find in the book a great deal about the universal language of our traditions with regard to nature. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Kusumita. I'm pleased you mentioned that book. I was going to mention it too, but you beat me to it. It's not only a book of words, but it's a book of beautiful illustration and is very, very inspirational, I would say, as well as informative. So it just remains for me to say thank you to all the presenters for their wisdom, for their inspiration and their courage in staking out a webinar that goes on for more than 2 hours. But thank you also to those who've listened in and those who've joined in the chat. I hope what you've heard has enlarged your perspective. It's certainly enlarged mine, and I hope that you'll be able to go on from it to, you know, commend the things that you've heard and the inspiration you've received to many others. The times are urgent. We know that. You don't need to tell me, don't need me to tell you anymore. But thank you also to those behind the scenes who've helped with some of the technologies, particularly Miriam Kezada from the Parliament and Warwick Hawkins from the World Congress. I'm going to refer you again to the words of Thomas Berry that I use at the very beginning, and I'll end with it. It's a repeat. It goes like this: the story of the universe is at once scientific, mythic, and mystical. I think that's worth pondering for quite a long time in your prayers, your meditations, just as you walk along the street. Thank you again, everyone, for joining in what's been a very impressive and wonderful time together. I think we do this or we hug again. And smell. Blessings. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.